Who dared to cross the driest desert on earth? What force drove conquistadors into lands richer in resistance than gold? Why did this narrow strip of land, squeezed between the relentless Pacific Ocean and the towering Andes, become a decisive battleground, rewriting South American fate? This is no ordinary place on the map. It is where geography itself shapes destiny, where isolation breeds unique survival, and where every choice carries the weight of irreversible consequence. And yet, how did this country, once destined for obscurity, rise to become one of the continent's most advanced nations? The answers are etched in the soil, buried beneath centuries of relentless struggle. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Here stretches a ribbon of land over 4,300 kilometers long, a boundary where the known world fades into the edge of the earth, where desert sands clash with ancient glaciers, volcano is replaced by volcano, and the sea lashes the cliffs with fury as if trying to erase all memory of the land itself. This is Chile, a land forged by nature's extremes and human will. It is a crucible of decisions made in the face of fear, where survival meant mastering a harsh and unforgiving environment. But what came first, the land or the people who dared live on its edge? Long before the first Europeans glimpsed the Pacific shores, vibrant societies thrived here, bound by their own laws, gods, and rituals. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of human presence dating back 12,000 years before the current era. These early inhabitants came from the north, following the herds of guanacos and vicuñas, descending the Andes to tame the valleys and coasts. They walked unknowingly toward the world's end, not as explorers, but as seekers of new water, new game, new land. Their journey was a path to survival, not conquest, yet it set the stage for a saga of courage and loss that would echo through millennia. In the northern expanse now known as the Atacama Desert, the Chinchorro culture emerged, one of the most mysterious and overlooked civilizations of antiquity. Unlike the grand empires famed for pyramids and golden treasures, these people left no such monuments. Instead, they crafted an extraordinary relationship with death, predating Egyptian mummification by 2,000 years. Their funerary practices were not reserved for a privileged few. They embalmed everyone, men, women, children, even infants who never drew breath. What compelled a people to transform death into a ritual of communal life? Chinchorro mummies were meticulously prepared. Bodies disassembled, internal organs removed, reinforced with sticks, coated in clay, and painted in deep black or red hues. These were not mere remains. They were participants in ongoing ceremonies, standing within huts, linking the living and the dead. Death was no end, but a passage into a different state, an unbroken thread connecting generations. Yet, this fragile balance with nature, nurtured by a cooler, wetter climate, was destined to shatter. Around 3,000 years ago, the climate shifted dramatically. The rains ceased, rivers dwindled, and the desert advanced like an unforgiving tide. The Chinchorro culture vanished, swallowed by sands and silence, leaving only these enigmatic mummies as whispers of a vanished world. Southward, in fertile river valleys, the Mapuche tribes thrived, a people bound not by empire or written law, but by kinship, land, and ritual. They spoke Mapudugun, a language without a word for centralized power, reflecting a society where leadership depended on respect and negotiation, not domination. The Mapuche would become one of the fiercest resistors to conquest in the Americas. Their power lay in unity woven from clans and traditions, in a worldview that bridged the living and the spiritual realms. Unlike the conquistadors who sought quick riches, the Mapuche fought for survival and sovereignty over a land that demanded every ounce of resilience. Their story is one of defiance and identity, carved into the rugged valleys and forests, a testament to choices made in the shadow of annihilation. This narrow strip of land, hemmed by ocean and mountains, is more than geography. It is a relentless force that has shaped every human decision, every rise and fall. It is a place where isolation breeds ingenuity, but also exposes mortality, where the ocean's bounty is met with its cruel tempests, where every victory carries the weight of sacrifice. How did those who walked this edge confront the haunting question, to endure or perish? And how did those choices echo through the centuries to forge a nation that defied its destined obscurity? The story of Chile is a saga of irreversible choices under the specter of fear and survival, choices that intertwined human courage with nature's fury. It is a history waiting to be heard and understood, where every decision ripples through time, reminding us that the edge of the world is never just the end. Subscribe to Quiet History to journey deeper into the crucibles of human resolve, where every story challenges what we think we know about fate, fear, and the power of place. What makes a society fight without seeking total destruction? How do ancient clans balance violence with survival? In the high valleys of the Andes, clans lived fiercely but autonomously, each on their own land, bound by unique traditions. They cultivated corn, potatoes, quinoa, herded llamas, and hunted guanacos. Conflicts were frequent but never genocidal. Raids captured livestock and prisoners, but never wiped out neighboring tribes. Violence was a currency of justice, balanced by compensation. Blood was washed away not only with blood, but with ritual. Yet, beneath this fragile peace, the stage was set for an irrevocable upheaval. Imagine life at 4,000 meters above sea level, where the air thins and water is as precious as gold. Here, the Aymara and Atacamenio tribes carved terraces into mountain slopes, channeling meltwater from glaciers to grow potatoes in near impossible conditions. Their survival depended on ancient trade routes across deserts, exchanging highland crops for coastal fish and sea riches. Each water source was sacred, each stop a gamble with death. But as the centuries turned, a shadow approached, an empire from the distant city of Cusco, intent on rewriting the fate of these lands. The 15th century marked the rise of the Inca Empire's relentless march southward. Step by step, they built highways, fortresses, and administrative hubs, an empire not merely of conquest, but of systematic colonization. The Incas uprooted and resettled populations, weaving conquered peoples into an imperial web. In the northern reaches of what is now Chile, resistance was faint. The Aymara and Atacamenio, merchants at heart, adapted swiftly, accepting new gods, new labor systems, and roads that linked distant jungles, coasts, and mountain valleys. Messages and mandates flowed like blood through the empire's veins, until the Incas met a resistance unlike any other. South of the Inca frontier lay the lands of the Mapuche, warriors without a king, without a capital, a people who thrived precisely because of their fragmented autonomy. The Incas found no throne to conquer, no ruler to negotiate with. Each clan fought independently, mastering guerrilla warfare, ambushes, and the unforgiving forests. At the 35th parallel south, near the Maule River, the Inca advance faltered. Beyond were rains, cold, and a fiery spirit unwilling to bow. The border carved by this standoff would echo through Chile's history. North, integrated and controlled. South, wild and defiant. Why call this land Chile? The Incas whispered it first, a name with origins lost in the mists of multiple languages. Some say it means cold or end of the land in Aymara. Others link it to a local tribe or a mountain bird. No one truly knows. Yet the word endured, a fragile label for a rugged strip of earth wedged between ocean and mountain, a name later preserved and carried by Spanish conquerors, a name destined to resonate across centuries and continents. In 1532, destiny arrived on the shores of Peru, not in the form of merchants or diplomats, but soldiers led by Francisco Pizarro. They came driven by greed for gold, thirst for glory, and a hunger for lands to claim for the Spanish crown and their own coffers. While the Inca Empire reeled from internal strife, these foreigners exploited every crack. Back in the valley that would become Santiago, a new chapter was about to begin. A valley protected by mountains, watered by a river, fertile for crops, but sparsely populated. An isolated outpost at the edge of the known world. The choices made here would ripple through history, sealing fates beyond return. Every decision, every alliance, every resistance shaped the destiny of this narrow land. The Incas, the Mapuche, the clans of the high Andes, and now the Spanish. Each wave of power met with human fear, desperate survival, and irreversible consequences. This was no mere conquest. It was a collision of worlds, where the past's fragile balance shattered beneath the weight of ambition and the cruelty of history's unfolding. What would become of Chile, born from conflict, resilience, and impossible choices? The answer unfolds in the shadows of these mountain valleys and coastal deserts, etched forever in blood and stone. Subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where history's deadliest decisions come alive. What happens when ambition meets a land unwilling to bow? How far will men go to impose order on chaos? And what cost will they pay when the ground beneath their feet rejects conquest? Pedro de Valdivia crafted a plan, a city rising from the wilds, ordered by the precision of Spanish design. At its heart lay a central plaza, streets radiating out in perfect right angles, clear spaces set aside for the church, the administration, and homes. But was this bold blueprint the first step towards lasting dominion, or the spark that would ignite relentless conflict? The city began to take shape with fragile walls built of clay, roofs woven from straw, and wooden palisades. Each structure stood not as a fortress, but as a temporary assertion of power, a point of irritation to the indigenous Mapuche watching silently. They bore witness to the felling of trees, the erection of houses, the breaking of soil for fields. Yet, in the early days, they held back. Was it disbelief in the threat, or a patient waiting for the right moment to strike? That moment came in September of 1541. With most Spanish soldiers away scouting the surrounding land, thousands of Mapuche warriors encircled the settlement. Flames consumed the fragile buildings. Allies were slain. The Spanish, fewer than 50, barricaded themselves in the city's core. They wielded horses, armor, swords, and crossbows. The Mapuche fought with spears, bows, and crude clubs. The battle lasted an entire day, a desperate struggle between courage and numbers. Though the Spanish repelled the assault, their city lay in ruins, a charred symbol of resistance. Valdivia faced the crossroads: abandon the devastated outpost, or defy the odds and rebuild. His choice was stubborn resolve. He ordered the city restored. This act of defiance was more than mere reconstruction. It was a declaration that the Spanish presence would endure. But the flames of war had only been stoked. What followed was not a grand campaign, but a ceaseless chain of skirmishes, ambushes, and assassinations. A brutal war without end. The Mapuche refused to bow, rejected Spanish sovereignty, and spurned oaths or treaties. They raided farms, assassinated settlers, drove off livestock, and razed fields to ashes. The Spanish retaliated with ruthless expeditions, capturing prisoners, burning villages, enslaving natives. This war was a grinding game of attrition, a conflict with no clear winners, no rules, and no mercy. Valdivia understood that to hold these lands he needed more than scattered settlements. He needed a network of fortified strongholds. So new towns rose: Concepcion on the coast, La Serena to the north, and Valdivia itself to the south, bearing his own name. Each was a small fortress, a bastion for expansion that never came. The Mapuche held the line at the Biobío River, halting the Spanish advance. This invisible boundary became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of the limits of imperial ambition. Would Valdivia dare to break this stalemate? In 1553, Valdivia gathered his forces for a decisive strike. Moving south, he attacked Mapuche fortifications, confident in Spanish arms and discipline. But the Mapuche were prepared. They lured the Spanish into a deadly trap, surrounding them with overwhelming force. Valdivia was captured, a man who had shaped the fate of Chile, taken prisoner by those he sought to conquer. What would his captors decide his fate should be? Tales vary. Some say the Mapuche forced Valdivia to drink molten gold, mocking his greed as he met a fiery death. Others claim he was simply killed, as others before him had been. No definitive account exists, but the truth remains. The founder of Chile fell at the hands of those who refused to submit. His death became a powerful emblem. The land would not be seized lightly. Every inch would be paid for in blood. Valdivia's passing plunged the colony into chaos. His successors squabbled for power, while the Spanish crown intervened, appointing an official governor. Yet the war with the Mapuche raged on, becoming the longest conflict in Spanish imperial history. The Arauco War stretched across centuries, over 300 years of near-continuous fighting, fragile truces shattered by renewed violence. The Spanish tried the tactics that had subdued empires in Mexico and Peru. kidnapping leaders, forcing conversion to Christianity, integrating natives into colonial economies. But the Mapuche were unlike any enemy before. They had no centralized authority to topple, no grand cities to capture. Their strength was rooted in the land itself, in forests, rivers, and a fierce knowledge of their terrain. This was a war destined not for swift victory, but for unyielding endurance. The question lingers: who truly held power in this land? Was it the conqueror with his iron will and weapons, or the steadfast defenders who refused to surrender their home? The saga of Chile's founding is a haunting testament to the cost of ambition, the resilience of those who resist, and the irreversible choices etched into the soil by flames and blood. This is a story of men who dared to dream conquest, and of those who dared to deny it. Not just a tale of war, but the echo of human fear and determination shaping history itself. What happens when a people once thought powerless learn to fight on their own terms? How does the tide of war shift when knowledge becomes a weapon sharper than any sword? In the 16th century, the Mapuche transformed, capturing horses, mastering the art of cavalry, and adopting Spanish tactics. They studied their enemies' weaknesses and adapted relentlessly. But could this new strategy be enough to turn the tide? The battle for survival had only just begun. Enter Lautaro, a young man who served under the Spanish, spying from within their ranks. His escape back to his people brought more than hope. It brought crucial intelligence. He knew how the Spaniards built their camps, how they defended themselves, and how they launched their attacks. Armed with this insight, under his command, the Mapuche struck back fiercely, destroying forts, burning cities, defeating Spanish forces again and again. Lautaro became a legend, a symbol of resistance so feared that even the mighty Spanish trembled. But his death in 1557 did not end the fight. It only intensified it. Could a people with no silver mines, no gold temples, survive against a global empire? Chile was Spain's forgotten edge, a land of struggling farms and scattered cattle, exporting wheat and wine to Peru, yet a colony that barely thrived. The Spanish settlers ruled these lands through the brutal encomienda system, a feudal slavery where indigenous people were bound to work the land for their masters under the guise of protection and conversion. This was a system rooted in cruelty. Many died under relentless labor. Others starved. The indigenous population was vanishing, and the colony's future hung by a thread. Then came the invisible killers: smallpox, measles, typhus, diseases the native people had no defense against. Entire villages fell silent, their homes left empty, their dead buried in mass graves. The collapse was as much biological as it was military. And yet the church stood at the center of this tragedy, both protector and oppressor. Missionaries sought to convert and educate, creating controlled settlements called reducciones. But the church also owned vast lands, exploited indigenous labor, and amassed great wealth. Was salvation a disguise for domination? Among them, the Jesuits were the most active, founding missions deep in Mapuche territories, negotiating peace, and sometimes defending indigenous rights. They criticized the encomienda, wrote to kings begging for reform, yet the king was distant, and the colonists held the real power. Laws were made but ignored, reforms promised but never enforced. The system persisted because those who ruled on the ground benefited immensely. Was justice ever possible in a land ruled by greed and fear? By the 17th century, Chile remained isolated and impoverished, a backwater in an empire that focused wealth elsewhere. All trade came through Peru, a perilous journey around Cape Horn and up the Pacific coast. Pirates lurked, striking Spanish ships and smuggling goods from Europe, Asia, and beyond. Trade grew, but only just enough to keep the colony alive. Chile was a place no one sought, only endured, a land shaped by hardship and reluctant fate. But a storm was brewing that would shake the entire continent. In 1767, the Spanish crown issued a shocking decree: the expulsion of the Jesuits from all colonies. This powerful order had lands, schools, missions, and influence at court, yet suspicion shadowed them, accused of plotting independence, acting as a state within a state. King Carlos III moved decisively. Jesuits were arrested, their properties confiscated, and deported back to Europe. In Chile, this meant the sudden closure of schools and missions, an upheaval that tore at the fragile fabric holding society together. What chaos would follow when a force for peace was suddenly silenced? This was not just a decree, it was a turning point. The shock waves of that decision echoed across South America, unraveling alliances, weakening indigenous protections, and destabilizing colonial order. The fate of Chile and its people hung in the balance, caught between empire, resistance, and the relentless march of history. What irreversible choices would shape the future, and who would pay the ultimate price? If the then sip in battles raged with brutal ferocity, but no decisive victor. Patriot forces held the central valleys. Royalists clung to the south. Armies were ill-equipped and ill-trained, yet blood flowed relentlessly. In the bloody Battle of Rancagua, 1814, Royalists crushed the Patriots, forcing their leaders to flee over the Andes into Argentina. The Patria Vieja had fallen. A bitter exile began, the birth of the Patria Nueva, but in a land far from home. In Argentina, the exiles found a powerful ally, José de San Martín, a visionary general burning with the dream of liberating South America from Spanish chains. He knew the key lay in Peru, the royalist stronghold, but first Chile had to be freed. His plan was daring to the point of madness: gather an army, cross the forbidding Andes, strike the royalists where they least expected it, and reclaim Santiago before pressing northward. In 1817, the Army of the Andes, commanded by San Martín and Chilean patriot Bernardo O'Higgins, began their harrowing ascent. 5,000 men, thousands of mules, horses, cannons, and supplies clawed their way over 4,000-meter peaks. The same mountains that had swallowed conquistadors now tested them anew. Conditions were brutal: frostbite, altitude sickness, deadly falls into ravines. But unlike before, this force was prepared. Supplies cached in advance, routes scouted, communications secured. 3 grueling weeks later, most emerged alive on the other side. But the true battle was only beginning. What awaited them beyond the peaks could destroy everything, or ignite a revolution that would echo through history. The fate of a nation hung on a knife's edge. If this story of impossible choices, shattered loyalties, and fierce hope grips you, subscribe to Quiet History for more, because the battle for freedom was far from over. What does it take to shatter centuries of control? Can a single battle redraw the fate of a nation? On a cold day in 1817, 276 years after Santiago's founding, the Army of the Andes clashed with Royalist forces at Chacabuco. The fight was brief, but the consequences would echo for generations. Patriots struck from both sides. The Royalists crumbled and fled. The path to Santiago was open. Victory was within grasp. Yet, the true price was yet to be paid. On February 14, 1817, the Patriots entered Santiago amid cheers and hope. Bernardo Higgins was declared the Supreme Director of Chile, the symbol of new beginnings. Just 1 year later, on February 12, 1818, Chile officially declared independence. But freedom was far from secured. The defeated Royalists retreated south, regrouped, and strengthened by reinforcements from Peru, they returned with vengeance. March 1818 saw the Royalists strike back fiercely at the Battle of Cancha Rayada, nearly capturing Santiago itself. The Patriots were shattered. Their hopes threatened to collapse. O'Higgins, desperate and determined, gathered every last soldier, called for volunteers, and scraped together arms and supplies. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of Chile hung by a thread. April 5th, 1818, on the Malpo Plain near Santiago, the decisive battle unfolded. Both armies threw everything into the fight. The clash raged from dawn to dusk, blood and sweat staining the soil. By evening, the Royalists were utterly defeated. Their remnants fled south, facing destruction or surrender. Independence was won, but at what cost? O'Higgins ruled as a dictator, an impassioned patriot, but an authoritarian leader. His reforms were radical, abolishing noble titles, curbing church power, establishing education, and founding a navy. This navy was Chile's shield against Spanish attacks and a lifeline for José de San Martin's campaign to free Peru. But inside Chile, cracks began to form. His rule sparked resentment and unrest. In 1820, under British Admiral Thomas Cochrane, Chile's fleet struck Spanish positions along the Peruvian coast, enabling San Martin's landing and the fight for Peru's liberation. Victory abroad contrasted with turmoil at home. O'Higgins' reforms challenged the aristocracy, his firm grip angered liberals, and his religious policies antagonized the church. Tensions boiled over. In 1823, rebellion erupted. Facing the threat of civil war, O'Higgins chose exile over bloodshed. He stepped down and fled to Peru, spending his remaining years away from the land he helped shape. Remembered as Chile's founding father, his reign ended not in triumph, but in bitter disappointment. What happens when a nation's soul fractures under the weight of its own birth? After O'Higgins' fall, Chile spiraled into chaos. Factions waged brutal battles for control. Liberals clashed with conservatives. Centralists fought federalists. The military opposed civilians. Constitutions were written and torn apart. Governments rose and fell in a dizzying spiral of coups and revolts. Yet the storm did not subside. Decades later, Chile advanced its ambitions southward, pushing into Peru. By 1881, Chilean forces marched triumphantly into Lima, ending the war with a decisive victory. But peace came with a harsh price. Bolivia lost its coastline entirely, becoming a landlocked nation, a wound still raw and unresolved. Peru suffered too, losing its southern provinces rich in nitrate deposits. Chile claimed vast territories abundant with resources. This newly acquired nitrate fueled an economic boom, providing over half the government's revenue. With newfound wealth, Chile built railroads, schools, ports, and modern cities. Santiago blossomed into a metropolis with wide boulevards, electric lights, and trams, a city transformed. But wealth was a cruel master. The elite grew richer, constructing palaces and emulating Parisian grandeur. Meanwhile, the majority languished in poverty. Workers in nitrate mines endured brutal conditions, endless shifts under a scorching desert sun, meager pay, scarce water, and rampant disease. British-owned companies squeezed every last penny from their labor. Desperation bred resistance. Miners began to organize, demanding better conditions and wages through strikes. The struggle for dignity and survival continued, a stark reminder that progress often comes with sacrifice. In the shadows of prosperity, the fight for justice was only beginning. If you want to uncover more stories where fate, fear, and fierce choices shape history, subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when the very system designed to protect you turns its weapons against you? In the northern Chilean city of Iquique, 1907 became a year etched in blood and silence. Workers, desperate and united, demanded a fair wage, a fair chance. Instead, the army opened fire. Hundreds died, some say over 1,000. The true toll remains buried beneath layers of government lies and fear. This massacre, known as the Santa Maria School tragedy, ignited a symbol of class struggle that would haunt Chile's soul for decades. But how did a parliamentary republic allow such cruelty? The stage was set for a brutal showdown between power and the powerless. Chile's political system was a facade, parliamentary on paper, but ruled by a narrow elite behind closed doors. Voting wasn't for all. Only property-owning, literate men could cast ballots, locking out the voices of workers, peasants, and the poor. Corruption festered. Political parties served elite factions, conservatives, liberals, radicals, all agreeing that the status quo could never be truly challenged. The masses were silenced, their cries ignored or crushed by force. Yet beneath this repression, new fires sparked. Socialism, anarchism, the labor movement spreading like wildfire. The elites watched nervously, knowing well the chaos unfolding in Europe, fearing that Chile might follow the same bloody path. The First World War briefly lifted Chile's economy, driven by the booming demand for nitrate used in explosives and fertilizers. But this fragile prosperity was shattered when German scientists unveiled synthetic nitrate. Prices plummeted, exports halted, and unemployment soared. Banks collapsed. Hunger stalked the streets. President Ibanez tried to steer the sinking ship, but the tide was unstoppable. In 1931, massive protests forced him from power. He fled the country, leaving Chile to drown in chaos. What would come next in a nation teetering on the edge? The following years were a whirlpool of instability. Governments changed like the wind. In 1932, a daring coalition of socialists and military officers declared the Socialist Republic of Chile, a bold experiment lasting a mere 12 days before collapsing. This brief flash exposed a society fractured and radicalized, where leftist ideas gained ground among workers and intellectuals alike. The old order trembled, but resisted. Could a deeper transformation survive the storm? By 1938, hope stirred in the form of Pedro Aguirre Cerda, leader of the Radical Party and candidate of the Popular Front, a coalition of communists, socialists, and centrists. His government launched sweeping reforms, expanding education, improving health care, industrializing the country, and backing labor unions. But entrenched conservatives fought tooth and nail, blocking legislation and stalling progress. The fragile recovery crawled forward as tensions simmered beneath the surface. The shadows of a new global war loomed. World War II rekindled demand for Chilean copper. Though Chile remained officially neutral, copper shipments flowed to the Allies, especially the United States. This brought much-needed foreign currency, jobs, and a temporary calm. Yet the end of the war unleashed a new crisis. The Cold War's icy grip divided the world, dragging Chile into the sphere of American influence. Inside its borders, leftist movements swelled, with the Communist Party gaining strength among the working class. The stakes were higher than ever. What price would Chile pay for its place on the ideological battleground? In 1947, Gabriel González Videla, elected with communist support, suddenly pivoted. Pressured by the United States and conservative factions, he outlawed the Communist Party, arrested its leaders, and sent many to brutal labor camps in the desert wastes of Atacama. An anti-communist hysteria gripped the nation, fueled by the relentless tensions of the Cold War. The left was fractured, but not defeated. The yearning for social justice, wealth redistribution, and resource nationalization still pulsed beneath the surface, refusing to die quietly. The 1950s and 60s brought a tentative democratic stability. Presidents rose and fell, but democracy endured, fragile and incomplete. The ghosts of past repression lingered, but the struggle for Chile's soul continued unabated, crossing every generation, every family. What choices would define the nation's future? How far would those in power go to preserve their grip? And what cost would the people pay for their dreams of justice? The story of Chile is a relentless cycle of decisions, each one rippling through time, shaping destinies. From Iquique's blood-soaked streets to the deserts of Atacama, from fleeting revolutions to cautious reforms, it is a tale of fear, courage, and irreversible choices. Each chapter forces us to ask, when does survival become resistance? When does silence become complicity? The answers lie in the shadows of Chile's turbulent past. If you want to uncover more stories where history's turning points pulse with human drama and consequence, subscribe to Quiet History, because every decision echoes through time, demanding to be remembered. What happens when freedom is promised but chained by inequality? How far can a nation go before its fabric tears? In 1949, Chile took a monumental step. Women won the right to vote, a beacon of progress in a land rife with contradictions. Literacy was climbing, industry expanding, Yet beneath the surface, the nation's veins pulsed with unresolved conflict. The majority of copper, Chile's lifeblood export, was controlled by American corporations, while vast tracts of land lay in the hands of a few powerful landowners. Peasants toiled in poverty on foreign fields for meager wages, trapped in a cycle of despair. Cities ballooned with migrants fleeing rural destitution, settling in desperate slums made of cardboard and tin, devoid of water, sanitation, or hope. This was the crucible from which a dramatic political storm would erupt, one that would test the very soul of Chile's democracy. Chile's political spectrum was a battlefield marked by sharp lines and stark choices. On the right, conservatives shielded the interests of the elite, the church, and major capital. Center-right, Christian Democrats advocated for reform within capitalism's bounds, seeking social justice without revolution. To the left, socialists and communists demanded radical upheaval, nationalization, wealth redistribution, a new social order. In 1964, Eduardo Frei Montalva, a Christian Democrat, emerged victorious with his promise of a revolution in liberty, deep reforms without violence or dictatorship. Yet his land reforms and partial nationalization of copper only splintered the fragile balance. The left deemed them toothless, the right dangerous. The tension simmered, a pressure cooker ready to explode. Then came 1970, a turning point etched in history. Salvador Allende, leader of the leftist Unidad Popular coalition, became the first Marxist democratically elected in Latin America. His vision was audacious, a peaceful march to socialism through ballots, laws, and nationalization. Copper, banks, major industries, Allende sought to bring them under state control, deepen land reforms, raise wages, and regulate prices. Initially, hope blossomed. Wages rose, unemployment fell, and the poor gained access to food, education, and health care they had never known. But this fragile dawn soon gave way to an economic nightmare. The nationalization of copper ignited fury in the United States. American companies demanded compensation, and Washington responded with economic warfare, sanctions, credit freezes, and a boycott that strangled Chile's copper exports. Revenue plummeted, and the government resorted to printing money to cover expenses. Inflation exploded, price controls backfired, and store shelves emptied. People queued endlessly for bread, milk, and basic staples, while black markets thrived in the shadows. Meanwhile, right-wing and centrist forces, backed by business, church, and the middle class, mounted fierce resistance. Strikes paralyzed the country, and the fabric of society unraveled under the weight of escalating conflict. What price does a nation pay when fear becomes a tool of control? The streets ran red with violence. 3,000 dead, 40,000 tortured, hundreds of thousands forced into exile. This was not chaos. It was a calculated campaign of terror aimed at crushing the left, silencing dissent, and terrifying a nation into submission. Augusto Pinochet did not merely eradicate political opponents. He reshaped Chile's entire economic and social landscape with ruthless precision. Under the guidance of Chicago economists, disciples of Milton Friedman and champions of the free market, Pinochet unleashed a radical neoliberal revolution. State companies, save for copper, were privatized. public spending slashed, social programs gutted. Markets were deregulated, labor protections abolished, unions crushed. This economic upheaval mirrored the political terror, a revolution of austerity and market fundamentalism. At first, growth sparked, unemployment dropped, bankruptcies declined, but the cost was staggering and permanent. By the late 1970s, Chile had transformed into a showcase for neoliberal triumph, its copper exports soaring. Yet this so-called miracle was paid for with the blood and suffering of millions. Democracy lay in ruins, social inequality ballooned, and the rich grew richer as the poor fell deeper into despair. Education and healthcare became commodities, accessible only to those who could afford them. The middle class shrank, pensions were hollowed out, and the nation's soul was forever scarred by the irreversible choices made in those turbulent decades. This is a story of fateful decisions, promises of freedom, the crushing weight of fear, and the irreversible consequences that shape a nation's destiny. What lessons does Chile's painful journey hold for the fragile dance between democracy and power? The answers lie buried in the echoes of history, waiting to be heard. If this story moved you, dive deeper with Quiet History. Subscribe now and explore the untold dramas that have shaped our world. What happens when a nation's fate is sealed by iron fists and whispered fears? How far can power stretch before it shatters under its own weight? Augusto Pinochet seized Chile with brutal resolve, establishing a regime of terror that reached beyond borders. His secret police, DINA, hunted enemies relentlessly, leaving bodies and silence in their wake. One chilling echo of this terror was the assassination of Orlando Letelier in Washington, orchestrated by DINA agents, proof that no exile was safe. But terror breeds resistance. The question remained, could fear alone hold a nation captive? Pinochet was not alone in his cruelty. He was a key player in Operation Condor, a deadly alliance of South American dictatorships coordinating to eliminate leftist activists continent-wide. This was a network of fear, a shadow empire built on disappearances and death. Yet beneath this oppressive monolith, a pulse of defiance grew. The Chilean church, initial supporters of the coup, turned against him. Cardinal Raúl Silva Enriquez founded the Vicariate of Solidarity, a beacon for victims, a guardian documenting atrocities and giving voice to the silenced. But could righteous truth survive the crushing weight of state terror? Amid mounting international condemnation, the regime's grip began to show cracks. Human rights organizations, foreign governments, and the United Nations openly denounced the violations. Still, Pinochet remained unyielding, dismissing criticism as weakness. Internally, the regime's legitimacy eroded, setting the stage for a gamble that would decide Chile's future. In 1988, confident in his hold on power, Pinochet called for a plebiscite to extend his rule by 8 more years. Could a dictator truly survive the will of his people? The nation's breath caught as opposition forces united under the simple, defiant banner, the No Campaign. It was a surge of hope, a wave of peaceful resistance filled with songs, rallies, and colorful posters. Against the odds, 56% of Chileans voted no, denying Pinochet the extension he sought. Forced to concede, the dictator agreed to democratic elections. The tide was turning. But could this fragile victory withstand the shadow of military power still looming large? In 1989, Patricio Aylwin, leader of a coalition of Democratic parties, won the presidency. On March 11, 1990, Pinochet relinquished power, but only partially. He remained commander-in-chief of the army until 1998, and the military retained significant influence, including immunity in the Senate. The Constitution crafted under Pinochet's watch stayed intact, and the economic policies he championed endured. Democracy had returned, but the ghosts of dictatorship haunted every corner. Could Chile truly heal when its foundations were still shaped by authoritarian hands? Chile's economy blossomed, poverty declined, and a burgeoning middle class emerged. Yet justice for victims of repression was painfully limited. Amnesty laws shielded many perpetrators, while only in the late 1990s did trials begin to reveal the regime's darkest truths. In 1998, Pinochet was arrested in London at the request of a Spanish judge investigating the murder of Spanish citizens during his rule. But the general was returned to Chile on health grounds, avoiding full accountability until his death in 2006. What price does a nation pay when justice is delayed or denied? A new chapter dawned in 2006 with the election of Michelle Bachelet, Chile's first female president, and the daughter of a general persecuted under Pinochet. Her presidency embodied reconciliation and progress, introducing reforms across education, pensions, and women's rights. Yet beneath these hopeful changes, social unrest simmered. Students demanded free, quality education. Workers pushed for better conditions. Indigenous Mapuche communities sought the return of their ancestral lands. Chile's wounds were raw, its people restless. How long could simmering discontent remain contained? In 2019, a single spark ignited a nationwide explosion. When Santiago's subway fares rose, students started jumping turnstiles, refusing to pay. What began as a protest against transit costs soon engulfed the entire country. Millions flooded the streets, demanding new institutions, social justice, and an end to neoliberal policies. The government responded with brutal repression. Police fired live rounds, beat protesters, and blinded many with rubber bullets. But the people would not yield. Singing, dancing, painting graffiti, occupying plazas, they waged a revolution not of weapons, but of voices and hope. Would this wave finally break the chains of history? Amid the chaos, the government agreed to hold a plebiscite on drafting a new constitution, a symbol of potential rebirth. In 2020, despite turmoil and uncertainty, Chile stood at a crossroads once again, poised between its past and an uncertain future. What irreversible choices would this restless nation make? And would the scars of dictatorship ever truly fade? If you want to dive deeper into stories of power, resistance, and the human spirit caught between them, subscribe to Quiet History. The past is never silent. What if the very foundations of a nation are questioned and rewritten, only to be rejected again? How does a society wrestle with its past while desperately trying to shape its future? Chile faced such a crucible, caught between hope and resistance, progress and fear. The aftermath of a global pandemic sparked a plebiscite, an unprecedented vote where 80% of Chileans demanded a new constitution. But what came next would reveal the painful fractures beneath the surface. A constitutional assembly was formed, unlike any before. A historic tapestry woven with equal representation of women and men, indigenous voices from the Mapuche people, activists, and the vibrant energy of youth. For 2 years, they crafted a progressive blueprint: rights to water, housing, health care, environmental protection, and indigenous sovereignty. This was a document meant to redefine Chile's identity. Yet in 2022, when put to a referendum, the people rejected it. Why? Fear of radical change, anxiety over instability, and a tide of misinformation drowned out the vision. The nation stood at a crossroads, uncertainty thick in the air. What does it mean when the promise of transformation meets the wall of hesitation? The process began anew in 2023 with a new, more conservative assembly drafting a second proposal. But once again, the people said no. Twice rejected, Chile remained bound to the Constitution of Pinochet, a relic repeatedly patched but never fully replaced. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a symbol of unresolved wounds and contested identities. The weight of irreversible choices bore down on a fractured society. Chile today stands on precarious ground. Its economy is developed but uneven, a fragile democracy with trust in institutions eroded. The nation is torn between those clamoring for radical change and those desperate to preserve stability. Left and right, generations and regions clash in a volatile mosaic. The Mapuche people in the south continue their struggle for ancestral lands, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent. Environmental activists battle powerful mining corporations poisoning water, destroying glaciers, annihilating ecosystems. The tension is palpable, shadows lengthening over the nation's soul. From the bustling skyscrapers and metro lines of Santiago to the sprawling shanty towns on its outskirts, Chile's contrasts are stark. The Atacama Desert, home to the world's largest telescope, peers deep into the cosmos, while the glaciers of Patagonia quietly melt. Easter Island's enigmatic moai stand as silent sentinels to the nearly vanished Rapa Nui people, survivors fighting to preserve their culture against the tide of time. Valparaiso, with its colorful houses perched on hillsides, echoes a golden era as a Pacific port, long eclipsed by the Panama Canal. Every corner tells a story of survival and resilience. But survival here is no simple act. Chile lives on the edge, between the vast ocean and towering Andes, caught in the fury of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, struggling with droughts and floods. The peoples who call this land home have endured millennia of upheaval, from indigenous ancestors to conquistadors, colonists, and waves of immigrants. Each epoch brought irreversible choices, shaping a nation of stark contrasts and enduring scars. Chile's culture pulses with vibrant life. The vineyards of the Central Valleys rival the best in the world. Simple foods like empanadas stuffed with myriad fillings, pastel de choclo's golden corn casserole, and the iconic completos, the Chilean hot dog with avocado and mayonnaise, tie people to land, tradition, and family. This is a country where identity is forged in both history and everyday moments. Immigration has layered Chile's identity further. In the 19th century, Germans settled in the south, bringing their architecture, beer, and wine traditions. Italians, Croats, and Welsh immigrants merged their customs with Chilean life, preserving distinct identities while becoming Chilean. The 20th century welcomed refugees, Jews and Spaniards fleeing civil war, and later migrants from across Latin America. Today, Venezuelans, Haitians, Colombians arrive seeking hope, enriching the national tapestry but also stirring new tensions. Chile's relationships with its neighbors are as complex as its internal struggles. A century-old rivalry with Argentina simmers over disputed borders in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, moments where war seemed imminent, but diplomacy pulled the continent back from the brink. Bolivia's bitter wound from the War of the Pacific festers still. Its demand for sovereign access to the ocean met with firm Chilean refusal. The matter reached the International Court, which ruled against Bolivia, yet the political tension lingers unchanged. Peru, too, carries historical grievances, though its relations are comparatively more stable, anchored in trade and cautious coexistence. Chile's story is one of survival, of choices that echo through generations, decisions made amid fear, hope, and often conflict. Will this nation finally break free from its past, or remain shackled by the ghosts of old regimes and unresolved disputes? The answer lies in the hands of its people, standing once again at the edge of irreversible change. To follow this gripping journey through Chile's turbulent history and uncertain future, subscribe to Quiet History, where every story shapes the world we live in. What happens when a nation stands at the crossroads of history, caught between progress and the ghosts of its past? How does a country rebuild itself after decades of dictatorship without losing its soul? In Chile, these questions have fueled decades of struggle, hope, and fierce debate. The path forward is anything but certain. Chile's economy pulses as a vital artery in global trade, positioned as a bridge between Asia and South America. It is a member of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, APEC, and the Pacific Alliance. Trade agreements stretch worldwide, promising wealth and growth. Yet beneath this vibrant facade lurks a dependency on volatile commodity prices and the looming shadow of multinational corporations, threatening national sovereignty and the environment alike. Education was once Chile's pride, among the best in Latin America. But Augusto Pinochet's privatization turned schools into businesses, forcing students into decades-long debt. Universities like the University of Chile and the Catholic University rose in prestige, but remained out of reach for many. Student protests erupted in 2011 and again in 2019, demanding reform that only partially came. The wounds of inequality still raw and festering. Healthcare reveals Chile's sharp divide, a two-tiered system where the public faces long waits and scarce resources, while private clinics offer quality at a prohibitive cost. The COVID pandemic exposed these fractures brutally, yet Chile managed one of the world's most successful vaccination campaigns, a bittersweet victory amid crisis. Women in Chile have journeyed from absolute disenfranchisement during colonial times to holding the highest offices in government, including the presidency. But this progress coexists with terror. Femicide grips communities, sparking massive protests and the rise of the Not One Less movement, demanding laws, protection, and justice. The fight for gender equality is ongoing, charged with sorrow and hope. Chile's geography is a battleground. Ancient deserts, towering Andes, vast forests, and restless oceans. Yet relentless mining devours water and pollutes rivers. Logging razes ancient trees. Dams drown valleys. Fisheries are depleted. Activists wage war to preserve this fragile bounty, lobbying governments to balance economic ambitions with environmental survival. The stakes could not be higher. The Andes glaciers melt year after year, shrinking vital water reserves. The northern droughts grow longer and harsher. Forest fires rage uncontrollably. Floods and landslides increase in frequency. Climate change is not a distant threat, but a daily horror. Chile invests heavily in renewable energy, solar deserts, Patagonian winds, hydroelectric projects, racing against a clock that ticks faster with every disaster. But what of the people who live in this land of extremes? Their resilience is legendary. From the first humans who crossed the desert millennia ago, to the Chilean mummies who preserved their dead with reverence. From the steadfast Mapuche who resisted conquest for 3 centuries, to patriots who threw off colonial chains. This is a saga of unyielding human spirit, forged in hardship. The memory of dictatorship under Pinochet still haunts Chile. Workers who fought for rights, victims who survived repression, all carry scars that refuse to heal. The protests of 2019 were a climax, a desperate demand for change, justice, dignity. Yet the future remains a fragile promise built on the tenuous hope of millions striving every day. Earthquakes shake homes and lives apart. Political upheaval tears at the fabric of society. Economic crises erase savings, dreams, and security. Every setback tests Chile's endurance, and every recovery reaffirms it. This narrow strip of land between ocean and mountains is not just a place. It is a crucible of survival and relentless determination. Chile's story is a tapestry of irreversible choices, each decision rippling through generations. It is a nation where history's weight presses down, but the horizon remains wide open, uncertain, and fierce with possibility. This is the home Chileans have built, a home they fight to keep, against all odds. If you want to understand the relentless heartbeat of this land, its struggles and triumphs, subscribe to Quiet History, because Chile's story is far from over. What if the victories you fought for today become tomorrow's defeats? What if progress is nothing but an illusion, a fragile promise slipping away the moment you reach for it? Chile's history shatters the myth of linear progress, each triumph tangled with shadows of loss, each setback the seed of a new beginning. The nation's story is not a calm river, but a turbulent sea of decisions and consequences. Imagine a people not as passive witnesses, but as an active force, capable of resistance, revolution, patience, and compromise. From the streets of Santiago to the remote valleys, every choice made carved a path through chaos and hope alike. Every decision, whether by Salvador Allende or Augusto Pinochet, carried the weight of a nation hanging in the balance. But what happens when those choices lead to irreversible fractures? Chile today stands at the crossroads of global currents, a country shaped by its turbulent past and yet haunted by an uncertain future. How do you reconcile the scars of memory with the need for forgiveness? How can justice be forged without igniting cycles of revenge? These questions linger like ghosts, unanswered but demanding confrontation. The economy strains under the weight of modern demands, yet the land cries out for protection. How do you grow wealth without destroying the natural world that sustains you? How do you build a society where every individual, no matter their station, has a chance to thrive? These are not theoretical debates, but urgent battles fought in boardrooms, in protests, and in the hearts of millions.
Democracy itself teeters on a knife's edge.
In a world where authoritarian shadows loom large, how does Chile safeguard the fragile freedoms won through blood and sacrifice? The answer is elusive, and the process is relentless. Endless negotiations, disputes, fragile compromises, and fierce battles. This process, that messy, painful, imperfect struggle, is democracy incarnate. It is the pulse of history itself. Day after day, step after step, Chile moves forward, stumbling, rising, marching into the unknown. Because there is no alternative. Because history waits for no one. Because life demands continuation. Between the vast Pacific Ocean and the towering Andes, Chile stands as a land of contradictions and hope, a nation still searching for answers to the questions its past has posed. The human spirit here is tested by fear and resilience, by irrevocable choices that echo through generations. Join us on Quiet History to uncover how these decisions shaped a country, a continent, and the human condition itself. Because in Chile's story lies the unending saga of choice, consequence, and survival. Subscribe now to journey deeper into history's relentless tide.